All right. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and discuss this book. This is a topic which is very close to my interests. I've been working on this for quite a while, and having two books, I don't think it's too many. I think it's good. It means that people are very interested. But let me dive straight into the presentation. Why did we write this book? We wrote this book because lately, in the past 10 years, there's been an explosion of the use of these programs. Despite economic progress, there's always been a lot of crisis. Vulnerability is very high. And public works has emerged as one of the instruments that is being used to respond to crisis. If you look at this picture on the left-hand side, you can see public works, the number of public works that were used before 2000. And if you look on the right-hand side, you can see that the number of experiences and programs has been incredibly increased over the past 10 years. So why are we writing this book now? Why? Well, because when we started working on this in the early 2000s, we started to try to figure out really what these programs were all about, what they were doing, and we found out that there was not very much that was known about it. There was a lot of information scattered around, but there was nothing that was pretty much, we didn't have much information about these programs. At the same time, a lot of countries were a lot of things that were happening and they were very interesting. Take what happened, for example, in India, all the different experience. India's been running public works for since 1948, 49, but they've been evolving from one model to another. So a lot of things were happening. New models were being used, and there was not very much to know about it. At the same time, there were a lot of criticism of these programs. There was a lot of fear of corruptions, a lot of fear of the fact that the money that was made available for these programs was not reaching the beneficiaries, and the quality of the work done was not very good. So that's why we kind of started working on this. Now, what's different about this book? What we try to do is, first of all, we try to look at the analytical information we had, the studies that were done, and the analysis was done of some of these programs. And the other things, we try to look at the operational experiences, try to pick up some of the information that we drew up from the literature, from doing researches, and try to figure out as much as we could know about some of these programs, trying to figure out what it was, when this program started, how many people they were covering, how much money was spent, what they were doing. At the same time, we're also very much interested in the operational aspects. And one of the things that the bank, with other donors, organized was this South-South London Forum that we had about 300 practitioners that participated. That was held in Arusha in 2010. I don't remember the month. When was that? June 2010. And during that, and so we had a lot of people, we had a lot of interesting discussions. And another interesting thing we did, we gave a form to all the participants to fill out. And besides giving them a form, we also asked them to look at some of the, in some cases, we asked some of the participants to prepare some background papers, which they were then included in the book. So what's this book all about? First of all, we started looking at the objectives of these programs, trying to figure out really what these programs were trying to do, in all the different kind of applications that have been used to. Starting from that, we started looking at these objectives. And one of the things is very clear about the book. We drew a line about the type of instruments and programs we looked at. We just restricted ourselves to look at programs which were programs mainly as safety nets. What does it mean? It means that looking at objectives, we look at the objectives. There are two key objectives of public works. The first one is to provide a temporary work for poor people and give them a chance of earning an income. And the second one is to produce some public goods. It could be infrastructure, type of another type of community work that could be done. But the privilege here is on the transfer of income to the poor beneficiaries. There are, when you talk about public works in general, a lot of people, they think about, building roads and doing those things, and there are a lot of work which is done using high intensive labor, but this is not the kind of programs that we analyzed in our book. So when you start looking at that, at the objectives, we look at the objective and we saw, well, okay, we saw there were a lot of programs that had there were programs that only existed for a short period of time. That's what we call the one-time response shock programs. We had programs that had some seasonal characteristics that were done only during certain time of the year. In many low-income agricultural societies, these are done during the off-season. For example, you take Bangladesh, the main agricultural season was during the rainy season, and the main dry season was from January until June, and that's the time where most of these public works were done. Then we have programs that really try to address the issues of poverty, try to reduce poverty. When you look at these programs and look at, we kind of try to look at these programs from a regional point of view and from an income level point of view. And what was very clear is that all these programs had certain clear patterns that we're used to. If you take Africa, for example, there were mostly seasonal programs and programs to address the issues of poverty. If you look at Latin America, it was mostly response to shocks. Take, for example, the famous program from Argentina that was in 2002 to respond to the big crisis in Argentina. And then you look at the East Asia and South Pacific, and you have something else which is very interesting. You still have a lot of these seasonal programs, and then you have the other thing which is coming up is these employment guarantee programs when you look at South Asia, and this is the big experience of India. So a lot of things were happening. We try to systematize this a lot, and also if you look at the right-hand side, that you look at from income level, you can see that the poverty reduction is one of the dominant objectives of the programs in low-income countries. And when you look at the middle-income countries, is more in terms of responding to shocks. Then we looked at the kind of programs. And so, a lot of these programs were, had some kind of they were temporary. They came and went. There were a lot of programs that stayed there for 1 year and then 2 years and then they disappeared. You look at the list of programs, and I think in Ethiopia there was something like over 30 programs that have been put in place over a 10 years period. So we try to look at the models. Which kind of models of public works can emerge? So we look at, so we identified 3 main type of models: the short-term safety net programs, the ones that are used mostly for mitigation of covert shocks and mitigation of the idiosyncratic shocks. Then we look at long-term safety net programs, the ones that that they stay there. They're very strong institutional base, and they're program they used for a long period of time. Not necessarily the same beneficiaries, but they're programs that have a very strong institutional base. And these are programs which are very important if you want to achieve a poverty relief and food security objective. Take the case of India in this case, or the case of Ethiopia, or the case of Rwanda. In these cases, programs have a very strong institutional base, and you cannot have the strong institutional base of these programs if you do not have these programs in turn, set up as a long-term programs. And then we found out there were a lot of exciting things that were happening. That's what we call about the public works process. So these are the ones that help bridge a gap, between current poverty and what some people call graduations, permanent employment. There are a lot of things that were added to several programs to make them to add some other components. It's not only about providing sources of income to these beneficiaries, but is also providing something else. Sometimes it's training. Take the case of the program in El Salvador, for example, that was started in 2010, and another program you have probably, I don't know if you heard about it, the program in Djibouti, that it's focused on a certain percent of a certain type of population, and not only provides some training, but also provides some information about nutrition for children and things like that. There were a lot of things that were done. But one thing is clear from looking at all these intersections of objectives and models, that really these public works in one country are very different from public works in another country. So one thing that comes out very clearly for us is that we don't have one single type of program, and every country has been experimenting with some kind of program, and this is a good thing, because the bank has always been criticized a lot for having the cookie-cutter approach. Just what works in Rwanda must work in El Salvador, and not necessarily true. But now I think I'm talking a little bit too much. One thing. Okay, going back to the book, we looked at the design. We look at the design. We say, okay, so how do you design a program? What are the targeting that you use? How do you fund it? Implementation. A lot of things we did. There is a toolkit that we worked on, and with Colin and other co-authors, to look at really just one of the very big details. When we look at which kind of form do you actually use in order to know how many people have worked on this project during these days, with just very much down in detail. And lastly, evidence. This was the part of the book which was a little harder to write, because there are a few famous evaluations that have been done, Ethiopia, Argentina, now India, but there is a lot more that we would like to know. Okay, which are some of the challenges and opportunities we faced? One big one was corruption. I start from the bottom. Too much money ends up in the official pockets, and then you read the newspaper in India and you find that maybe every other day there is some kind of official pocketing the money. And I have done an analysis of public works in Bangladesh, was in 1998 or something like that, and I found out that there were about 30% leakages that did not receive the proper beneficiaries in a set of programs that I analyzed, something which is very important. So we focus on governance, control and innovations, IT-based, something very, very important, and Colin is going to say a little bit more about what we've done, and a lot of new things are happening, like social audits, community participation, and so on. And the other one is the monitoring evaluation. I talked a little bit about the evaluation, the fact that we wanted to have a lot more to draw on, and unfortunately, so far, there is not much. There is something which is in the works, but a lot of more can be done. The main results, as I said, is from Argentina, India, and Ethiopia, but a lot of new things are happening, and I think a lot of people in this audience are actually working on some very interesting evaluation programs. And I'll pass it to Colin to give us a note, and the chair said that it's all right, on time.
Are you sure, Rachel?
Yeah,
you can
good.
indulge us. Okay, thank you, and thank you for inviting us here to be in London today. I just wanted to talk through a little bit about the data. One thing we're actually quite happy to have achieved in this book and to share online with you is just the background data that we generated for this publication. And it comes from two sources, a background paper in 2010 on making public works work, which was just 43 countries looking at various data on program objectives, targeting methodologies. And then in 2010, again, there were 42 countries looking at 53 different public works programs. And in the 22 event, what we did was we gathered some of the same information to cross-check, but we also delved down a little bit more onto the operational side to look at information on the implementation structures, on the financing arrangements, what was in the pipeline for monitoring and evaluation. So we were surprised that our book ended up at 400 pages, but a good 50 pages of that is actually the data, which is available for everybody to plow through. And in the end, the book itself covers 62 countries, 77 programs, and provides a nice information source. One thing we would like to also flag were the case studies that went into this book. So the first half of the book is largely it's written by our co-authors, but the second part of the book is a series of case studies that we commissioned largely from operational teams working on these issues in the field. And here the focus of the book, and I think the added value of the book, is really on the implementation side. So the question we wanted to ask was, look, what actually works? Look at these lists of countries. They face very stark political economy, governance challenges, but in that midst, what are the key issues that are actually working from different countries that we could actually capture and codify and share? So the book itself goes through case studies on wage setting in Rwanda. It looks at some of the governance work in India. It follows the findings on the Ethiopia impact evaluation and Cambodia and Liberia. Another thing it does, I mean, we tortured ourselves looking at a case study on project selection for public works, which is a very mundane topic, but something that people struggle with hugely. So we put a lot of time actually documenting the work on the community-based project selection in Ethiopia. So there's a lot of interesting findings there, which I think should be a value added. Now, a presentation like this, where we're constrained to 20 minutes, we don't really get to go into into the meat and into the details, but just a stylized presentation of some of the key findings and where we ended up towards the end of the book. I think the first, before I get to that, this was the slide Carlo slipped in just half an hour ago. I'll get to our key findings, but maybe just to look at a couple of case studies on India and Liberia. The India case studies were interesting because looking at the monitoring and evaluation question and how that can inform good governance, one of the issues we came out with there was the combination of top-down and bottom-up approaches, both necessary, neither sufficient by themselves. And we have a nice case study looking at the IT-based management information system on the public works program in Andhra Pradesh. So it's the state within India, which is a really good performer. And looking at some of the key features there, which actually comprise that IT system, and some of the lessons that came up along the way. You know, seeing that the IT system wasn't led at the beginning by a bunch of technology gurus, but it was actually responding to the key questions that was informing the policy design, and it grew up iteratively out of that. The case study on Liberia is an interesting story because it's a story of public works in response to the food crisis and what came out of the food crisis. A small program with 17,000 beneficiaries, but which grew into a larger program that was scaled up into the youth employment scheme over the last couple of years. So it was a public works in response to a shock, but that eventually got scaled up into a larger program trying to touch upon the youth employment issues and the skills. What was nice there, I think one of the issues we've struggled with is the question of evaluation and the degree to which these programs are actually properly evaluated and assessed, and really what should our expectations be on that front. Because when you look at the impact evaluation and the blue chip impact evaluations, it only covers a narrow amount of programs, India, PSMP. But within the Liberia context, we supported a light evaluation. So that was a combination of quick quantitative and qualitative techniques. So we could see very quickly as the operation evolved in that crisis context what some of the real issues were. And there's a nice discussion, for example, on the wage setting. The program goes against the orthodoxy of setting a wage level below the real market wage rate, but for political economy reasons set a higher wage level, and it probes the discussions and the issues around that and gives that a political reality check. The 5 lessons that we have to take forward was that we could see that the use of public works is expanding, and I think that the flagship experiences on India, Bangladesh, Argentina, they're getting traction, and the lessons learned are being disseminated quite increasingly around those programs. And I think governments are increasingly looking for different things in these public works programs. One thing that we didn't mention were the secondary objectives around it. There's also issues that public works might respond to objectives on social cohesion. So the argument that public works might play a role in promoting community participation, in promoting inclusion in the labour markets, are often something that governments are looking at, but are not so well articulated in the documentation and some of the primary objectives that we think about on public works. And the second issue was that public works are complex, but they're being customized. And I think increasingly we're seeing the question that we need to customize public works not only to low-income settings, but also to some middle-income settings. The Arab Spring and the issues that faced us with moves us towards a public works plus model as well. So actually trying to combine the objectives on temporary income support with longer-term employment opportunities, whether through jobs or whether through community services, is certainly a hot topic. The final lessons: innovations are making program implementation smarter and more efficient. And I think these lessons are being shared around, and these get to the administrative issues on public works implementation. The Andhra Pradesh story, helping to promote beneficiary identification, tracking payments, and program monitoring. We see nice experiences from the bank side, at least, of programs sharing that information across countries. So I know ILO, for example, were recently involved in one of our study tours between India and Yemen and sharing those experiences across. And the question of governance and corruption is just a real issue that faces practitioners on the ground, whether through program leakage, access to job cards in the India experience. And the message there was looking at what are the combination of top-down and bottom-up approaches that might work. But we see a large agenda remaining, and that comes back to some of the empirical gaps. The Public Works Plus question is quite nascent, but also the issue of assets and the assets that are generated through public works and the return that we're getting on these assets with the labour to capital intensity ratio, where a large amount of spending is going on asset creation. So it's a lengthy publication, available for purchase online, but with our open access policy at the bank, also available to download for free online. So if you visit the following website, please go there, and you'll see that a lot of the operational manuals that we collected too are actually available online, and some of the impact evaluations that we cite. So it's a good source of information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for sticking perfectly to time. I'm very impressed.